Hello, everyone. It's time for my latest political podcast. And in this case, I want to talk about one specific issue for today, and that's about internships as a whole. Unpaid internships, paid internships, sort of how that ties into the minimum wage and employment and things like that. So I recently posted about Facebook suggesting that the president issue an executive order to consider internships as jobs so that they would be treated as such under the Fair Labor Standards Act, things like that, so that they get worker protections, wages, things like that. Now, in reality, a lot of this post was sort of a hyperbole. I don't think the president legitimately has jurisdiction over sort of all jobs and defining them. But what the president does have jurisdiction over is federal jobs. Theoretically, the president could pass an executive order recognizing federal internships as employment, thereby subjecting them to the Fair Labor Standards Act, the minimum wage, things like that. And so today I want to discuss sort of these issues and also some of the comments that other people brought up on this Facebook post. So let's go over that real briefly. And hopefully this podcast will be informative, but also won't take too long. So generally, most internships are unpaid, or if they are paid, it's only a metro cost or a stipend or things like that. And granted, I'm talking from the DC area, so that might not be representative of the whole sample, but I would say most internships follow that general pattern. However, this is a very dangerous problem. The reason is it allows businesses, NGOs, governments, whatever it may be, to use these unpaid internships instead of hiring actual workers. Because from the business perspective, rather than hiring a worker at the minimum wage, they could just have an intern doing the same basic work, filing invoices, making copies, things like that, for $0 an hour. And so it actually distorts the labor market significantly. So keep in mind that having a paid internship would yield consequences and possibly benefits for not just the interns themselves, but also other workers as well. That's why I believe all internships should be paid, at least if you're over 18 and you're working at something that's established, like a business, a government, something like that. If you're working for your dad or mom's store or something like that, that's a little different, but in terms of working for like a formal internship, anything where you'd have to fill out a resume and application, I believe should be paid. And here's why. First of all, you're performing real work. I've held several internships and I am indeed doing work. But here's what I know for sure. I've held actual jobs and I've held internships. Now, let me give you a cross comparison that makes me think that interns should be paid the minimum wage. So I worked at my local city hall as an actual worker, not an intern, but a worker. And so what I did is I updated things on spreadsheets, I made invoices, the typical things that a basic entry-level position person would do, but also the same things that an internship person would do. The same things I'm currently doing right now as an intern at the Democratic Governors Association. Now, at my job in Santa Clarita, at my job working at City Hall, I got paid $13 an hour. $13 an hour. At my current job, or at my current internship rather, where I'm doing the same things at the Democratic Governors Association, filing invoices, making copies, the same exact things, I'm not getting paid at all. So I'm doing literally the same work, but not getting the appropriate reward for it. Now, I'm not saying all interns should be paid $13 an hour. Even I admit that maybe is too much to ask. But should they at least be paid minimum wage, which isn't really asking for much? I believe it's currently $7.25 at the federal level. Of course, each state has a different minimum wage. I think that's fair enough. And so that has effects for everyone. Of course, if all the interns got paid, they'd actually have compensation, but it could actually help boost some of the other entry-level workers as well. Some of the people right above the interns would get paid a little bit higher, and it would encourage an atmosphere where you actually have to pay your workers to do work, which is how it should be, and it also gives workers powers. And even if you aren't for necessarily wages, which I think you should be, especially since most people listening to this are probably college students, probably having interns. You guys are probably doing internships yourselves, many of them probably unpaid, so it'd be great to have them paid. But even if you don't necessarily agree with having wages, what about worker rights and protections? There was recently a case in New York where an intern was sexually harassed and wasn't able to use federal law in her defense because since the internship wasn't a considered full, like in an actual job or employment under the Fair Labor Standards Act and other things, she didn't have the legal rights to protect herself. Now that's ridiculous. Interns not only should have wages, but they should also have rights because they're also essentially workers in whatever atmosphere that they're in. So it's great for interns to have more rights, better wages, and that helps also push the other people as well. Now, some of the concerns that some of you raised were that it could lower possibly unemployment. And here's my response to that. At the end of the day, I don't think it's actually going to matter that much. Most businesses actually have a rather inelastic demand curve when it comes to labor, so they wouldn't be losing that many workers at all, if any. And the additional gains that an intern would get in terms of wages, in terms of being on the consumer side and having more money to spend, would outweigh any jobs lost. In fact, there could be net jobs gained because of increased spending, because now these interns have money, could create more jobs, more to offset any that would be lost. Not to mention, I'd rather have a society where if you had a job, at least you have the workers and rights. We shouldn't have a society where we care so much about everyone having a job, but then having jobs that have no rights and very small wages, because then that's not really a job to have at all. I'd rather have a society where, okay, maybe the business has to hire one or two less people, but the people that are going to be there are going to be paid right, are going to be treated right. And that's good too, because it's better to, if the thing is to do an entry level position, if the business needs certain work done, it's better to hire someone to have that done and hire just an entry level position than to just create a sort of side internship position just for the purpose of getting that same work done, but then it allows the company to pay that worker or the intern $0 an hour, as opposed to if they hired an actual worker, they'd have to pay them at least the minimum wage. So I think there's a lot of benefits, and I'm not saying there aren't any costs to paying interns, but I think the benefits outweigh the costs based on more money in interns' pockets, raising other people's wages proportionally, because you have to keep the wages proportional. So if the interns now get paid, you have to slightly raise the wages of some of the people above them in the similar positions. So I think overall, that's what an internship is for. It's about work experience and things like that. But for a lot of even graduate PhD students, they are doing these internships. I don't like the argument that internships are just to get your foot in the door, because employment as a whole should be to get your foot in the door. I mean, I don't think that just because you're getting your foot in the door doesn't mean you should not get paid, because you're still doing actual work. That's not an argument against necessarily having rights and having work, having rights and having wages. So that being said, that's how I feel about internships. As someone who's got paid for doing the same work that I'm currently doing, for someone who's done two different jobs, one of which was paid and one of which was not, but doing the same work, I know that interns are doing actual work. I know they deserve to get paid. It makes no sense that they get paid $0 an hour. In fact, in many times, internships actually cost more money. You actually pay to be an intern, because if you're driving or taking the metro and you're not getting paid anything, you're paying more money to actually go to that place than you're actually receiving in return. So you're actually making a negative, meaning you're paying money to have an internship. And I believe that's ridiculous as well. And just one quick note, internships oftentimes are tilted towards the more affluent. I see that personally in DC, because only people with certain opportunities have that. If you force it to be seen as employment, it creates a more equal playing field, also because it's more subject to federal laws as well, which take into account discrimination and things like that. So just keep that in mind. It helps eliminate this whole rich boys club, which is more of a problem when it comes to the business internships and even some of the government internships. And I'm not going to lie, it affects some of my internships too. One of the things I'm pretty proud of this semester is I got my internship not through networking or anything, just straight up applying and just being a qualified candidate. I had no knowledge of the organization, or at least or anyone there beforehand. It wasn't a networking thing. I simply applied. My university has a great internship career website that allows me to see all of them. So it's good to also find internships that you're not necessarily comfortable with, or not comfortable, but are outside of your comfort zone, that you don't necessarily network. So it's more that it just verifies that you're qualified. But this is a minor point. The last thing I'm talking about with the availability of internships is something that's a big discussion in terms of discrimination, access to employment, something like that. I would like to bring that up in the future. But the main point of this podcast is mainly to just show why interns should be paid. And it's generally, I think, a great thing if they would be paid. I think it's great that we do have some paid internships, at least not all of them are unpaid. But I definitely think, though there are costs, though there are disadvantages, the benefits, the pros outweigh the cons. If you want to discuss this, if you have feedback, if you disagree, or maybe you agree with me, just let me know. Comment, like this podcast, show your friends, things like that. If you are listening to this, thanks so much for listening to the whole thing. Hope you have a good day, good weekend whenever you're listening to this. Spread the word. Thank you so much for listening, and I appreciate your support. All right, everyone, that's it for today.